Major support for Louisiana Eats on WWNO provided by Zatarain's, proud producers of authentic New Orleans-style cuisine. Zatarain's, a New Orleans tradition since 1889.
From WWNO New Orleans, this is Louisiana Eats. I'm Poppy Tooker. March is Women's History Month, so this week we'll hear from some of the ladies who make waves in the world of food and drink. Bawdy Southern belle Julia Reed shares typically outrageous Julia tales and divulges the recipe for something she calls Yucca Flats. Then, Geechee girl Valerie Irwin explains how her love for rice is virtually genetic, something I suspect we're born with here in Louisiana, too. And we'll talk about the Yakamain phenomena with Linda Green. It's all ladies, all the time, on this week's Louisiana Eats. You may perceive the Mississippi Delta as a quiet place where proper Southern belles are born and bred. Internationally well-known author Julia Reed's bawdy tales of her upbringing there will change your view of that forever. You know, I have to say, reading about your life there, it really sounded like an inordinately fun place to grow up.
It was really fun, and part of the reason is because, I mean, you know, you're sitting around in the middle of the Mississippi Delta. There's not a whole lot to do all the time. The Delta was sort of a safe haven. It was not quite as violent as the rest of the state, and we had a great newspaper, Pulitzer Prize-winning newspaper, you know, Hotting Carter. The second, who was originally from here, from Hammond, wrote, you know, editorials that won in the Pulitzer Prize for preaching racial tolerance long before it was in vogue. And so we had a lot of people coming to town, and you have to give them a party.
Yeah,
that's when I decided I wanted to be a reporter, because every time a reporter came to town, they had a huge party for him. And, you know, he'd wake up off the floor in our living room, and I would be catching the school bus or something, and this guy would be sort of rearing his hungover head and writing, like, on the typewriter in those days, you know, Dateline, Little Rock, and I'd be sort of smart aleck kid, like, aren't you supposed to be there?
Yeah.
He's like, shut up, kid. So I'm thinking, well, this is a great way to make a living.
Well, I have to say, you know, the whole thing, it's very elegant in that way that only Southern elegance somehow seems to do that. You just take everybody along with you on this whirlwind world tour that is the life of Julia Reed. We go to Paris, we go to London, we even cruise the Nile.
So go to Afghanistan. That's right.
When was your first significant trip abroad, and what's your favorite place?
Oh, man, it's too hard to pick a favorite place, but when I first started working in magazines, they were still like big, huge money-making enterprises, unlike now. But, you know, and the budgets that we had in the early days at Newsweek and at Vogue were just enormous. I mean, I could no more get away with spending the kind of money we used to do. Now, it doesn't exist, but you used to be able to sort of live very well on an expense account. You know, so I had a lot of experiences in places that I never otherwise would have gone, which was great. I mean, my first trip abroad was to France because I was dying to go, and I was still 14 when that happened, you know, on a study abroad thing. But when I started working for Newsweek and then for Vogue, you know, I'd go to places that, like I said, I would never have gone on my own. Like, you don't wake up and say, I think I'm going to take a vacation and go on the Trans-Siberian Railway across Russia.
But that's a pretty nifty assignment.
It was, but, well, no. I mean, there was no, like, shower on the train. It was pretty horrible. And I was going to some women's conference in China, and there were a bunch of German lesbians and French intellectuals, and it was just, you know, it's like, okay, here I am on the train.
On the train with them.
But it was kind of fun, you know, and they, you know, and then I didn't have the right visa, and they dumped me in a forest in Novosibirsk and had to make my way back to Moscow. And in retrospect, those are always the great trips.
Of course. Well, I loved the way you approached this book by dividing it into 3 sections, and those sections are eating, drinking, and making merry. And of course, the book is filled with all of this very cosmopolitan elegance, and there's chapters entitled Of Paris and Pims, Men and Martinis, and of course, Champagne Charlotte. But then, Julia, you bring up this concoction called Yucca Flats. So, let's leave Paris and let's leave the Pims and just take us to the Yucca Flats.
Well, as much as I do love a Pim's Cup and a Pim's Royale, especially in the Ritz bar in Paris, I had an equally big fondness for a Yucca Flats just because I don't know what made me think about it. I was writing a column for Newsweek, and I started thinking of summer drinks and how it changes and everybody starts putting more fruity things and you switch from dark to light liquor. And it reminded me of the Yucca Flats that I drank at our neighbor's house where I learned all kind of important things in life, like how to play poker and how to hold my beer. And, it was my first experience with all the boys in the neighborhood. Our neighbor had this huge big playroom, and it had everything that you needed in life, like a pool table, a stereo, a poker table, and an old couch. And in the summertime, the older boys would mix up a Yucca Flats in a trash can. So I started thinking, I wonder what was in there. I just remembered it being really delicious and like lots of squeezed lemons and limes floating around in there and some cherries and God only knows what else and a lot of ice. So I go online and I realize that like everybody's pretty much lived the same life because there are all these things online going, oh yeah, this is great to drink when you're having poker, or sometimes we mix it with our feet, and it's always in a garbage can. So I'm thinking this is like some international trend. The Yucca Flats, everybody had one at one point or another. Anyway, it's a delicious summer drink. So I sort of reimagined the recipe.
And it's quite a punch bowl. I mean, really.
It is. Well, a galvanized trash can it can be very, very chic, I'll have you know.
Now,
I have like this whole dream of having a big party, having nothing but huge garbage cans full of Yucca Flats. It'd be sort
really
of reverse
chic.
chic. I'm telling you.
Well, you are a woman who can and has lived all sorts of places in the world, but you decided to make New Orleans your home. Why is that?
I got seduced, like everybody does. When I was a kid in the Delta, we'd either go north to Memphis or south to New Orleans, depending on how much time we wanted to spend in the car. And New Orleans usually won. It's like people sort of think, well, if we leave now, we can get to Galatoire's, in time for dinner or whatever. I found out that the train from Greenville, Mississippi, my hometown, did not stop until you got to New Orleans. There was no point in going anywhere else in Mississippi. And it was a direct train. It was like the shuttle. So there's always been an affinity. And then I came for Jazz Fest, and I had just gotten a contract to do a book of essays on the South, and I thought, well, maybe I should start spending time there again. I was living in New York, and I was down here for Jazz Fest, and Edwin Edwards was getting ready to run again, and it was against David Duke. And since I was not a tax-paying citizen of the state of Louisiana, that was like a great story and hilarious instead of sort of a tragic turn of events. And I'm like,
yeah, vote for the crook. It's important.
Yeah. I mean, so I thought I'll never see an election like this again, ever. And I thought, well, what the hell? I'll just come down. And I heard myself saying at about 3 o'clock in the morning after a post-Jazz Fest party, oh, yeah, I'm getting an apartment here. And I thought, well, then I guess I should.
Yeah.
And I did.
Well, I'm glad you did. And in your opinion, what do you think is the worst mistake that nervous hostesses often make?
Trying too hard, I think. Thinking, ooh, I'm having company over and I got to make some really incredibly overwrought, fancy thing. And I went through that when I was a kid, and I was like the youngest person at Newsweek in the Washington Bureau. I did know how to cook because I, grown up, as you said, watching my mother and her friends entertain and cooking. So I thought, well, I can impress them with, even though like they've actually have bylines and written books and stuff. I'm like, I can give a good dinner party. But instead of just sort of cooking a squash casserole or whatever, the first big dinner party I had, I just drove my mother insane. And I'm calling her up on the phone, and it was during the advent of Nouvelle cuisine. So in the New York Times in those days, there were all these fussy, complicated, but not actually very good sounding recipes. So I was driving Mama crazy on the phone in the days when long distance actually cost money.
Isn't that funny?
Do you think I should have this or this? And I'm going through all these recipes, and she finally just cut me off and said, why don't you just make something that tastes good? And it sounds silly, but it's not. I mean, I became a food writer entirely accidentally when I was still writing for Vogue, because I had a party for an editor there who was leaving, and it wasn't my usual crowd, but I had my usual menu, which was like biscuits with country ham on it and a big old bowl of crab meat maison like they make at Galatoire's.
That never fails, does it?
Deviled eggs, which apparently nobody had ever seen before because they were like tracing the trays around. And these were in the days when in New York, the most popular sort of cocktail party fare was stuff like dried out chicken sauté on a stick, which is like so horrible. The next morning, this editor at the Times called me up and said, would you like to write about food? Because they'd never seen anything quite like a stuffed egg, apparently, or a ham biscuit.
Well, that was the best party ever then. Good. Congratulations. That was quite an accomplishment.
But, I mean, it just goes to show you, it's like it really is, have some food that tastes good. I mean, my go-to hors d'oeuvre is things like fried oysters. I mean, what's not to love?
Okay, I've got a Julia Reed quote that I want to talk about. You once wrote, this is the quote, "I want to own Antoine's restaurant in New Orleans so I can restore to the gorgeous and delicious temple of Creole cuisine that it once was. And I stay up late at night writing the daily specials that I would have on display in the front room." Yeah, that was really quite something. Your aspirations are boundless. So
I would be good at running a restaurant.
What are you talking about?
Well, Antoine's is just depressing these days, and I'm sure, we're both going to get mail saying, "How dare you insult this bastion of New Orleans society, if not cuisine anymore." The first thing I do if I owned Antoine's, just make that kind of food, but do it really well. And in the front room, you'd have a great oyster bar in there and have more relaxed fare, like on Mondays you could have red beans and rice or whatever. Just depressing because those rooms are so beautiful and you can make it so extraordinary. And I think it could be this really fun kind of temple of cuisine again.
Well, I am so grateful that you had a chance to stop over during one of your stops at home on this big tour.
I'm grateful that you asked me to be on the show. I'm a huge fan. And this was fun, believe me.
Well, come back anytime.
I will.
Julia Reed in her new book, "But Mama Always Put Vodka in Her Sangria." You're a guest at one of Julia Reed's soirees, you'd better be ready for some crazy drinking. One of Julia's favorite party drinks she calls Yucca Flats. In a glass jar, Julia combines a 16-ounce box of powdered sugar with 2/5 of gin, a 6-ounce jar of maraschino cherries and their juice, along with 6 oranges, 6 limes, and 6 lemons cut in half. She tops the jar off with ice and gets the party started by taking turns making the guests give the jar a shake. When some of the ice melts, Julia's Yucca Flats are ready to serve. They're sure to act as a real icebreaker at your next party, but Julia won't say how many servings you'll get from the gallon jar. After all, she's not sure what sort of drinking friends you may have. I'm Poppy Tooker, and you're listening to Louisiana Eats. When we come back from a short break, I'll introduce you to a real Geechee girl, Valerie Irwin. Stay tuned. I'm Poppy Tooker, and you're listening to Louisiana Eats, edible content for Louisiana food lovers. Louisiana Eats is brought to you with major support from Popeye's Louisiana Kitchen and Zatarans. Each year, the New Orleans Center for Creative Arts Culinary Program invites restaurateurs, chefs, and media representatives to judge a cook-off between 3 of their top culinary students. The winner of the dish that makes a difference is then featured in more than a dozen restaurants across New Orleans. There's a lot more than bragging rights at stake. Proceeds from each sale go back into NOCA's Culinary Arts Program. Producer Thomas Walsh sent us this postcard.
My name is Ariana McKnight, and I am a Level 3 Culinary Arts student, and I'm also a junior academic studio student here at NOCA.
My name is Kwana Bourgeois. I am 16 years old. I attend Warren Easton Charter High School, and I attend NOCA as well.
My name is Landry Duchesne, and I go to NOCA full-time, and I'm a culinary level 2 student. I was in a local contest for Emerald Lagasse Foundation, which is named Dish That Makes a Difference.
This is my first time actually competing, like submitting a recipe. We have it every year since culinary's been a program at NOCA.
My name is Dana Danzi-Tui. I am the founding department chair of the Culinary Arts Studio. These are things they have done all on their own. They've had to research, they've had to write shopping lists, they've had to do their budgeting, they've had to do absolutely everything connected to this dish. So I cannot wait to see these dishes come out, and to see the judges' reactions is going to be just amazing.
What I have prepared today for you is a fried lemon parsley shell crab with a seafood herb pasta. Thank you, guys.
Yeah, I'm just kind of looking for stuff that I'd enjoy eating if I went out to a restaurant, or if I'd send it back. And so far, I wouldn't send any of this back, so it's pretty good.
They don't work with a lot of butter and cream, which is nice. So there's kind of no safety net. Everything comes off real cleanly. And technique-wise, they're very, very good. They train them very well over here.
We'd have to change up the plating probably. But we'd probably go with the overall intent of the dish, the flavors, the freshness of it. Some of these guys cook better than my guys.
I was just scared to talk to the chefs and hear their feedback, because we're learning how to take criticism good, and I'm really not good with criticism. Like, I don't like hearing bad things, I like hearing good things.
Well, it's really delicious. I could see this working on a lot of different types of menus around New Orleans. Definitely has an identifiable connection to New Orleans, but the treatment that she chose here is also unique. So it's familiar but contemporary, and that seems to fit pretty well with what diners are looking for today.
So my dish was Barbare seared drum with a mango relish and peri-peri shrimp and strawberry glazed okra. For the Barbare seasoning, I choose that because it had a lot of things that related to New Orleans, so fenugreek and really spice and garlic and that pow kind of thing. Just come out really good.
You're really into it.
Yeah.
You really like food.
I really like it. Yes.
We are doing regions at NOCA right now, and so we recently just left India, and I loved India because of the spices, and I like hot food, so that's why I picked India to inspire my dish.
I think what really lifts this to another level is the use of the Indian spices. It caught me completely off guard, and I love curry and I love Meunier sauce, but I never thought to put them together. And I think that alone is a stroke of brilliance.
I'm nervous.
I think that anybody who wins deserves it, and we all are very
Because we all really worked hard today and throughout the whole week.
And we all supported each other through it all.
Because we're all best friends at the end of the day.
Yes.
So it doesn't matter really who wins.
Because I'm going to be by that person's side no matter what. Yeah. Okay. So let the best man win.
The most points was attained by Ariana.
Whoever knew that my recipe will be developed in so many restaurants around New Orleans, and I would never think that would be, but it is. I have to actually process this in my brain. I'm like, is this going to happen? After today, maybe I'm going to cook the dish for my mom. I've been talking to her about it. She's really chill about it. She's like, yes, Ari, I support you. That's my nickname, by the way. And once the restaurants have my recipe in there, I may go to some restaurants, or maybe all of them.
You know, it's always a great feeling when chefs kind of go, oh my gosh, how did they think of this? And that's what really gets them going as well. Because as a chef, you kind of go, wow, I thought of something that nobody else did. They just did great.
For a full list of restaurants participating in the Dish That Makes a Difference, visit wwno.org or check out the Dish That Makes a Difference on Facebook. Chef Valerie Irwin fosters a love for Southern history, culture, and cuisine in her hometown of Philadelphia. Every day at Valerie's restaurant, the Geechee Girl Rice Cafe, she and her 4 sisters maintain the traditions of Georgia and South Carolina's Low Country by serving rice, the Geechee's ultimate staple. The Geechees are the people of West Africa who were brought to North America as slaves specifically because of their rice-growing knowledge. Sometimes they're also referred to as the Gullahs. I asked Valerie to explain the difference between the two.
Gullah has a much more defined definition. It's much more delineated, and so the Gullah people live on the islands off South Carolina. Geechees usually from Georgia and Florida, not from South Carolina, and they may live on the islands, but it's a looser term for the descendants of the enslaved Africans. So they may live on the islands, they may live on the coast, but from what I know in that area, a lot of times it's called Geechee Gullah culture or Geechee Gullah food. So I don't know that they make such a big distinction.
What does it mean to be a Geechee girl?
Well, I have to say, I don't necessarily think of myself as the Geechee girl, but everybody else does. At least people who don't know me. So even though I was born and raised in Philadelphia, I'm now kind of indelibly connected to the Low Country, and people are always interested in why I opened the restaurant. My mother's parents were from Charleston. My father's parents were from Savannah. We really did not go to those places. Most of our family had moved away by the time I was growing up, but my parents ate very similar kinds of food. So we did have rice every day. The other things we didn't have every day, but we did have rice every day, so I kind of continued that tradition.
It really does all have to do with rice. That's actually in part of the title of your restaurant. It's the Geechee Girl Rice Cafe. So why was it important to use that word?
It is kind of the backbone of the cuisine, and it's the staple grain in that part of the country, even though for the most part they don't no longer grow rice in the Low Country, but everybody still eats rice.
Well, I know that the Geechee Girl Rice Cafe is an institution in Philadelphia now, but I bet you've had to do a lot of food persuasion over the years.
We still do food persuasion. Yes, because of things like the Carolina Gold rice, and people don't know what it is, or just as often I get people who say they don't like grits, to which I answer, you've never had grits. If you have them and you don't like them, I'll give you something else, but taste them first. Or on all of our plates, our house vegetable is a sauteed collard green, and we blanch the collard greens and then saute them. So they are bright green, and they're tender, and they still have all the flavor of a fresh vegetable. They're not like stewed to death. And we have to do a certain amount of persuasion about that too. Either people who don't like collard greens, or people who like their collard greens cooked all day with ham hock. But in general, when people have it, it's like instant conversion.
You've described your cuisine as one of the only true indigenous cuisines of America. And the same can be said, certainly, of Creole food. And I was wondering if you would just give us a little thought on your comparison and contrast between those two traditions and the fact that they are so deeply rooted indigenously in the place they grew up.
Well, what I see is the big connector and also the wellspring of both of those cuisines is the African influence. And the African people trying and to a great extent succeeding in keeping some of their foodways. So things like eating rice and leafy greens and okra. When you look at places around the world where there are African people, you'll see a lot of those similarities. And even if you didn't know who lived there, if you looked at the food, you could tell Africans lived there. I would say the big connection between the food of the Lowcountry and the food of New Orleans is that there was a critical mass of African people. And that didn't happen around the country in general. And I think that's why you see it in Brazil and you see it in the Caribbean, because in a lot of those places, the Africans outnumbered the Europeans.
Would you talk to us about why food and culture have been a lifelong fascination of yours?
I wish I knew. I do. I wish I knew. I just think it's fascinating. I find both things fascinating. I find cultural threads as just a really compelling subject, and I find food a really compelling subject, whether it's just that it's delicious or how it's made or how you preserve it, if it's cookbooks or oral history or hands-on teaching. And then when you put the two of them together, there's just such a wealth of information, and it tells you so much about where the people came from. And because of this, that's what really fascinates me. So I've done meals over the years with cooks from other countries. And what I would ask them is, let's have a meal that you would have if you went to your grandmother's house for dinner. Like a Sunday night dinner or something equivalent to that. So not a holiday meal, not a feast, but a meal, but not like just a weekday, we got to get something on the table meal. And everybody has it. It's so fascinating.
Valerie, why has the Southern Foodways Alliance become an important part of your life?
Well, first of all, everybody in the Southern Foodways Alliance loves food and culture. So I kind of miss that when I go home, that everybody isn't talking about, where food comes from. And I love that the mix of chefs and writers and scholars. And, there is that really warm Southern sensibility that I don't necessarily get at home, and that I don't necessarily possess myself. But when I'm with the Southern Foodways, I get to sort of bask in that a little bit. I really do feel it more because of the Southern Foodways Alliance, even than I did because of my family. Because I've been to the South more with the Southern Foodways Alliance than I ever was with my family. So with my family, it was mostly just the food, but now I feel like the food and the place.
Well, I am so grateful that the Southern Foodways Alliance caused you to be able to come visit with us in New Orleans and on Louisiana Eats. Thank you, Valerie.
Oh, you're very welcome. This has been a pleasure.
That was Valerie Irwin, Philadelphia's own Geechee Girl. Louisiana Eats roving reporter Jill Benson always knows where to stop for the next great meal. So, Jill, where have you been eating lately?
Poppy, I stumbled into a place called Que Rico, authentic Cuban food in Old Town Slidell. What an amazing find this was. I was with a group of friends, and we were just starving, and we stumbled into this little strip mall. Very humble little Cuban restaurant. And the lady who runs the place, her name is spelled Iderlin. And if I even attempt to pronounce it, I will butcher it. So she says people should just call her Donna.
Oh, that's funny.
Donna Carrillo.
Okay.
And she grew up in New Orleans in a family of Cuban heritage, and then moved to New York for a couple of years as an adult, and then moved back to the New Orleans area to be with her family. And she and her husband opened Que Rico Cuban.
So what do you eat there?
Oh, she has marvelous Cuban food. She was telling me this wonderful story. She says it scares her sometimes when these old Cuban men will come into her restaurant, and she can always spot these characters because they look around and they'll ask really carefully, is this really Cuban? Is this real Cuban food? Is that what you make? And she said they always ask for a colada, which is a Cuban coffee. And they'll say something like, we shall see. And they'll sit down with their colada. And she said it happens all the time. She said she holds her breath. And then she said they'll sip their coffee and then they'll nod and they'll ask her to feed them. And
that's great.
She said she just feels so honored when they do this. And she'll start them off with either her ham or her chicken croquetas, which she sells for like $2 for $1. It's the most amazing deal in town.
And what is that, like a little fried rice sort of cake?
No, it's like a little. It's kind of like a little fritter.
Okay.
Yeah. And then maybe green plantain tostones, and then as an entree, she might bring them her lechon asado, which is a 12-hour slow cooked pork, topped with grilled sweet onions and her special mojo sauce, and it is just so good.
Oh, yum.
And her medianoche sandwiches, the midnight special sandwiches, are amazing. They're stuffed with roast pork, ham, Swiss cheese, and these divine, tangy house-made pickles. And then she presses the sandwich until it's all gooey and toasty.
And does she serve flan?
She has flan, but the flan is lovely, but the tres leches cake is divine.
Oh, Lord.
And she has these guava and cheese pastries that she cooks to order, and they come right out of the oven, and they're just so good.
You are making me so hungry.
I should. But she said, just watching these old Cuban men eat these meals, they just get so excited. Oh, I do have to say something about one of her famous customers.
Yes.
She said there was this man who would come in. He's just a tall white man. And she said he would come in maybe every other Friday, and he would sit there alone kind of early on a Friday evening, and he would just eat everything in sight. And she said it made her so proud. He really seemed to enjoy himself. And so then she started talking to him, and she discovered who he was. But she doesn't really follow culinary news that much, so it didn't really strike her. So she thought, okay, well, that's nice. This guy's a chef. Well, then as her restaurant became more popular and more gringo customers started coming in, they would notice this man. It's John Besh.
Oh,
gosh. He's a big follower. He just loves her restaurant, and so she's quite proud of that, and she should be.
So when can you stop in and visit Donna?
You can go see Donna. I'm not sure exactly what her hours are, but she's open for lunch and dinner most days. And her restaurant, Que Rico Cuban Cafe, is located at 1901 2nd Street in Old Town Slidell.
Well, I am hungry. Let's get in the car and roll.
Yes, ma'am.
Louisiana Eats roving reporter, Jill Benson. What's the difference between baking soda and baking powder? Stay tuned, and we'll solve that food chemistry mystery as soon as we come back. I'm Poppy Tooker, and you're listening to Louisiana Eats. Edible content for Louisiana food lovers. Louisiana Eats is made possible with major support from Rouse's Markets. Here's this week's culinary quiz question, brought to you with support from Popeye's Louisiana Culinary Institute. What's the difference between baking soda and baking powder? Both are leavening agents, which means they're the ingredient that makes baked goods rise. Baking soda is pure sodium bicarbonate. An acid must be added to baking soda for it to do its trick. That's why most recipes that use baking soda include buttermilk, yogurt, or, surprise, honey, which acts as an acid too. Baking powder has the acidifying agent already in it. That's what the cream of tartar's doing in there. Add any moist ingredient to baking powder, and that will ignite the leavening action. So turn on your ovens and let the rising begin. I'm Poppy Tooker, and you're listening to Louisiana Eats. Linda Green, the Yakima lady, has created such a stir about a spicy soup that it's almost reached cult status. The scholars of the Southern Foodways Alliance are even planning a summer field trip to New Orleans just to study the phenomena of a soup, also known as Old Sober. Here's what Linda has to say about it.
Well, Yakima meat is a soup. It is really a soup. You have a meat in it. You have noodles in it, green onions, and a hard-boiled egg. But for what I've been doing different meats. You can use just about any meat you want. Whatever your taste of meat, you can use that with the Yakima meat. I've been doing it with the shrimp and beef. It's delicious. But they have, like I say, they have two definitions about what it is and where it comes from.
So what do you think its origin is?
Okay. I listened to the part where they said that it comes from the Chinese American. Then I thought about the Korea soldiers brought it here from Korea. And I think I've been really on that part because it probably has been into the Chinese kitchen, but it also have been in the bars in the black community. That's where a lot of it come from, them bars.
Since the time of the Korean War, right, when those black servicemen came home.
That's right. And it's been into those bars, those corner bars.
Now, it's a big part of the New Orleans second line tradition,
yes,
isn't it?
Yes,
Why
it
is that?
I guess because I brought it out there. I was the one to bring it out there to the second line. And everybody started looking for me. They liked the taste. A lot of people were saying that they haven't had a Yakima meat in a long time. But by me being so persistent, they looks for me now with that.
Now, explain to me, something else I've heard about the Yakima is that it has another name, too. What's the other name for it?
They call it Old Sober.
Why?
And that's the reason why it was all in the bars. Believe it or not, I've tried it myself, and believe it, it has sobered me up, too. It is it's a cure for that soul. It really is. You know, a lot of people that drinks a lot, that didn't drink so much, and they ask for their Yakima meat, and they know that it sober them up. I've had a lot of people come to me and tell me, thank you, Miss Linda. I had that Yakima meat, and it straightened me out, and I was able to get home.
I'd like to know, what do you think the secret to your pork chop sandwich is?
I love pork chops. I've been loving pork chops since I was a little girl. But I think it's the way I fix it. Certain pork chops now, when I buy the whole cases of it or whatever, it's certain ones that I give my customers. In that case, they may have some bad ones. Mm-hmm. And what I do, I toss them to the side. You know, somebody come to me and I don't have nothing but like $2 or whatever. Don't worry about it. Here, take that. And sometimes I just let them know, you don't have to pay nothing. You know, don't do nothing. Just, yeah, I give it away.
So what makes a pork chop special? Is it the bone?
That bone. That's the bone. Yes. Because after you eat all of that meat, you want to suck on that bone.
That is one good bone.
Yeah, it is.
I'll tell you, it always surprises people to find a bone between two pieces of white bread. You got to know, you got to feel in there for the bone.
Mm-hmm. Yes, indeed. You got that right. That's the bone.
Now, another food that you're associated with is the huckabuck. What's that?
That is sugar and water. That's all it is, sugar and water. But you have your different flavors. You know, I have the cherry with fruit, and by request, they ask for bubble gum. because a lot of kids came to the booth and asked for the bubble gum, and I wanted to know why they wanted the bubble gum. And they told me because they wanted their mouth blue. And I got it. And
Now,
it's been a hit, too.
I thought that I heard some kind of story about the old-time Huckabuck tradition, something about sometimes you'd find a coin.
Quarter in the bottom of it, that's right.
Explain that to me.
Well, that's what, if you selling the Huckabucks and you put a quarter at the bottom or a nickel at the bottom, you get a free one.
Oh, that's
That
great.
is it. 2 for 1.
Well, I just want to thank you so much for coming to see us at Louisiana Eats.
Thank you so much for having me.
Linda Green, a New Orleans original.
With that best kept secret.
Farmers markets sprouting up all over the U.S. today, the movement hardly seems revolutionary now. But in 1996, Baton Rouge was ahead of the curve when the Red Stick Farmers Market popped up. Joining us for a look back at how the market began is Susan Turner, co-founder of the market and LSU Professor Emeritus of Landscape Architecture. Susan, welcome to Louisiana Eats.
Really glad to be here. Welcome to Red Stick Farmers Market.
Tell me, how did it all get started?
Well, I was just a teacher, and one of my brilliant students said, there's a man selling mustard greens on the side of the road in his neighborhood. Maybe we need a market in this community. And I said, well, that'd be great, but I don't know how to do it. He said, well, I do, if you can help me get the people together. And I knew the community, he knew the farmers, and there it was. That brilliant student was named Chris Campany. And he had done amazing work before he got here, too. He was a presidential intern with the EPA in D.C., and he's a planner now up in Vermont. So he was one of those great people who really know how to get things started.
What was the hardest part of starting the market?
The hardest part is still the hardest part, which is communicating why our mission is important, why the survival of family farms is really a challenge. If you look at statistics, where there used to be, let's just say, 400 family farms, maybe there's now 40. And these people are up against all kinds of market forces that make it a struggle to keep their land and to make it economically viable. If they didn't have an outlet like ours, they wouldn't be able to make it. Most of these people had second jobs when they started coming here. And they've been able, because of our access to shoppers, they've been able to get rid of that second job and make a go of it, farming full time. So that's a hard thing to communicate to people who come here once a week or twice a week and make friends with the farmer, but they're also interested in what they're going to cook for dinner tonight. So that's still the hardest thing, that and the connection to health.
That first day at the market here, could you describe that for us a little bit?
Well, being here today, I could think of nothing but that first day and how cold it was. And I'm not a morning person, and it was 5 o'clock and we were trying to get the 12 vendors that we started with organized and parked in the right place. And I just thought to myself, can we really do this here? And then to finally get a parking place and get out into the crowd this morning, I just wanted to cry because it's been a long journey, but it's finally really become an institution in this community. And people may not know why they're here, but they know they come here to see the community and to feel like they're a part of something bigger than just themselves. And at least that means we're halfway there.
I'm very impressed with how many important figures of the community show up. And I can tell you, this isn't my first time at the Red Stick Market, but I never come to the Red Stick Market when I don't see the mayor here. Your mayor, Kip Holden, is very supportive, isn't he?
He has been awesome from the beginning. He understands it. He's always understood it, and he's been a hero. Anytime we've needed anything, he's really come through for us. I think that so many people in our community really have connections to rural roots. I know I do, and, it really resonates, and people want to reconnect. They just don't know how to, and so I think that this really works for them.
I'm particularly struck by what a historic spot you all had the market placed in. When I come to the market, usually I get here and I go up and down the rows, but today I walk down North Street, and that view of the state capitol makes such a statement to have the farmers market placed right here.
When we first started the market, we were actually on the footprint of the original city market in Baton Rouge, and I kind of loved that, but it wasn't big enough. And we had a charrette with Andres Duani probably 10 years ago now, where we did a downtown plan, and because of the vision of people like Mark Drennan, we were sitting around a table and looking at a map, and they said, what about a public market? And we said, that's in our 10-year plan. We're not quite ready for it, but we'll take it, anything, because we knew we needed an anchor, not just an outdoor parking garage, because every time it rained and every time it was freezing cold, it was a disaster for us. So we were very fortunate to be a part of this plan to centralize all of the state government offices and to put a retail component and a permanent location into this new construction that the state committed to.
Tell me, was there a time when you thought maybe the market wouldn't make it?
Well, we're kind of at one of those times now. We have a lot of overhead because we operate this public market, which, eats electricity and generates terrific trash that has to be picked up. And there are all these expenses that you don't imagine when you start something like this. So most people think this place operates itself, but it doesn't. And we have a staff of 4 people. So we struggle every year to raise a budget to be able to pay for our expenses. When the economy's down, we're way down.
And what do you look for in the future?
I look for a community where everything's changed because the market is here, where people are not obese, where schools grow their food. I want an edible schoolyard like New Orleans is. I want us to grow our own Alice waters. I want healthy people who think before they eat and who celebrate food.
Susan, I want to thank you so much for taking the time in this busy market morning to talk with us on Louisiana Eats.
Thank you so much.
That was Professor Susan Turner, co-founder of the Baton Rouge Red Stick Market.
She brings me grits in the morning, sweet tea at 1, says sugar, hold the phone, we gonna have some fun. She loved me all day long, straight into the night. Ain't nothing wrong if it feels that right. I get a dip in my hip when she makes that trip, and my Baton Rouge baby come down to New Orleans. She keeps me cool in the summer.
That's it for this week's edition of Louisiana Eats, edible content for Louisiana food lovers. Next week, we'll go to baking school with the international king of pastry, Jackie Pfeiffer.
I have only my brain to put all the knowledge that can be learned and try to make sense of it, because I'm just a baker, a pastry chef, right? I was not trained to be a food scientist, to be an artist and all this. So it's never a profession where you can say, oh, pastry, I've done it. I've been there, done that.
Subscribe to our podcast, hear today's show, or catch up on previous editions anytime online at wwno.org and louisianaeatsradio.com. Louisiana Eats is made possible with major support from Popeye's Louisiana Kitchen, Rouse's Markets, and Zatarans. Additional support provided by Dickie Brennan and Company and Linda Green, the Yakima Ladies Soul Food Catering. Our media sponsor is Louisiana Life Magazine, the magazine of a great state. Original theme music by Johnny Sketch and the Dirty Notes. Thanks to executive producer Thomas Walsh and sound engineer Joe Schreiner. I'm Poppy Tooker. We'll see you next time. Louisiana Eats is a production of WWNO and the University of New Orleans.